Um, Good evening, everyone. This is my first video lecture uh, regarding Huckleberry Finn, the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. It will be followed by a series of other recordings that will be dealing with separate topics. So, in each of these videos, I will be analyzing, and finishing off with a singular topic. And even though the videos may be larger than the usual classes, I don't think that that will be causing any serious problem for you, because since you have the option or the choice of watching and rewatching the video, it should not be the length should not be a problem. So let us begin with one of the most important issues that surround this novel, the issue of race. Now, why do I call it an issue? Because race, as it has been depicted by Mark Twain or Clemens in this novel, in the novel The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, uh, it has been dealt, the way it has been dealt with has faced a series of serious controversies, a series of attacks, challenges. People of various nationality, of various racial backgrounds will be interpreting the novel in their own way. Some will be supporting the view that Twain presents in the novel, others will not. Regardless of all these multiple interpretations, and regardless of the variety of versions that we see or that we find across the scholarships that surround this particular novel, what comes out as the most important fact is that this novel is considered to be the singular most important American novel that dealt with adolescence, that dealt with race during the time, and it is still considered to be one of the most important books published. Uh, well, whether or not it is because of the controversies that surround it is of a different discussion altogether, but the fact remains that Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, is considered to be one of the most important, or the most important American novel of all times, as Ernest Hemingway would go on to say. We will begin this discussion by analyzing what one particular critic has to say. The name I will be writing in this video. Well, Julius Lester is of the opinion that when the time during which, that is the 1880s, or during which Mark Twain was writing, or during which this novel was published, was a time when slavery was essentially abolished, and America was a free state for all. And therefore he chose, or therefore he thought that he did not understand the way in which Twain was uh, promoting or depicting the racial attitudes of America. He thought, according to him, when Twain was writing, when slavery was essentially abolished, he could not find any reason as to why he would, as to the justification that Twain provides, that there is a slave who is seen the way he is seen, or Jim, or the character of Jim, as he is perceived by the other characters in the novel. He did not agree with the point of view of the writer. Um, he was in a dilemma, in a predicament, and he was justified by himself that a white American writing about a non-white American who is assigned to be a property, a chattel, a slave, could not, in all of his capacities brought together, depict the condition of that enslaved man to its very honesty. And that is true to some extent if you want to see it like that. However, we will be judging both the sides of the coin and then come to an interpretative conclusion. And therefore he would go on to say that if Huckleberry Finn had been written during the time of slavery, Huckleberries or Huck's uh, longish monologues, or the speeches that we find, or his personal speeches that we come across in the novel for so many number of times, they would have been justified. But since by 1885 or the 1880s, by 1880s, slavery was essentially abolished from the face of America, Huck's interior monologues do not depict a compassionate or justifiable or any liberalized idea of slavery. It hinges on the fact that even towards the end of the novel, when the friendship between Huck and Jim has been truly established as an honest one, when their relationship has developed to its fullest, when Jim is free, uh, quote unquote, when Jim is free, and even in chapter 40, we find Huck saying that I know he was white inside. So it is this dialogue, or it is this sensibility of Huck, who is a white boy after all, that a critic like Lester refuses to come to agreement with. That what the way that Huck was seeing Jim was a way of transforming him into the whiteness of the American culture. And this was what he considered to be truly dangerous, because a novel like because a novel like The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn was embedded, as he says, has been embedded in the American psyche, and it still is. And a novel of such popularity, a novel of such wide outreach, confessing or proposing such an ideology, such an idea, wherein a white boy stands in front of a black slave man with the notion of emancipating the other, says this line at last, that I know he was white inside. So maybe Huck's objective was to uh, clothe Jim in his own cultural sense or not. It is up to us to decide. And we find numerous examples of this similar kind of propagation in which Jim is not seen as the black slave that he was, but only through the lens of the white American Huck. And so we come across a passage in chapter 42, which I would like to read out to you. This is an extract from chapter 42 of the book. I would like you to read it, and you will find that in this particular passage, a clear notion of Jim as a hero comes out. Now, this hero is not the conventional kind of hero that we know. He cannot be described the way that we, as students of English literature, describe a person with heroic qualities. He is a hero who is subservient. He is a hero who is faithful. He's serving a white person. He is tending a sick white American. He is the prototypical good nigger, if I may use the word. He is the prototypical good nigger who lacks self-respect, dignity, and in a sense feels himself separate from the white other. Now, this way of of how should I put it? Now, this way of making a black individual or a black enslaved man a hero is a kind of self-propagation. When the white American stands beside the black enslaved American and says or shows or proves that this is a hero, but not before making him indignified, making him lacking of self-respect, making him as a submissive, subservient man who comes to the forefront, who comes to the light only when he is attending to a person who is not black, who is white. It makes this white American more lustrous. It makes him shine all the more because it satiates his or her own personal sense of morality without actually being a practitioner of it. This is not very much confusing if you just consider the theory of black or white. A light shining more brightly when it is darker around. And so, if I, being the more privileged individual, if I, being the white American, am praising a black enslaved man for the good that he does, the good that is directed only towards me, it is I who shine out as the hero, and never the person who is standing, or never in front of me, or never the person whom I am in reality assigning to be a hero. This becomes more of an issue because the character that we have as our hero is a white adolescent boy. Adding on to the problematics of the race issue that Mark Twain addresses in his novel is this adolescence of Huck, the adolescence which to many black critics will not be real. As we have already established in our previous classes that there was a clear-cut distinction, or there is an inherent distinction between the sensibility of the shore civilization, and the raft that Huck and Jim build to be their home, that will be their home for the longer part of the novel. And it is on this raft that the solidarity and the differences between these two characters emerge as the most strongest. The adolescence and the childishness of Huck will not be acceptable to many, or cannot be acceptable to many black black Americans of the time, or even now, because they would justly say that the kind of life that Huck wants, a kind of freedom from responsibility, is not a life that a black enslaved individual would ever come to see. So, if you examine these extracts from the novel again, you will find what shines through is not a sense of solidarity, but a sense of acute difference that exists between the two. And these are the kinds of passages that prove what kind of a world that show what kind of a world Huck wanted to be in. A world of absolute freedom, of natural liberty, of natural freedom that nature provides you with, that the heart of the nature provides you with, and which the Mississippi River stands for, as a stark contrast to the sensibility of the civilization or to the sensibility of the people who live on land. Now, this kind of adolescent idea of freedom, or this kind of yearning for freedom, for a paradise, for the black individual never existed. This reality that Huck sees forming in front of him, which he tries to grasp, or which he tries to stay in for a perpetually, does not exist for Jim at all. The raft, which is a place of escape, which is a means of escape or an instrument of escape for Huck, is an escape for Jim also. But Jim is escaping from a society that traps him to become a property, that traps him to become a slave, that makes him subject to to be transferred from generation to generation as a property, as a chair, as a table wood, as a piece of land wood. Whereas for Huck, it is a choice. He can leave the house of Mrs. Watson. He can leave the house of the widow because he can. Jim cannot. If Jim does, he is a fugitive. If he is a fugitive, he will be caught, he will be shot, he will be hung. And therefore, the paradise that Huck yearns for and makes Jim a part of is not actually a paradise for Jim at all. And if it is not a paradise for both of these men, or both of these characters who are situated on the same raft, then this paradise does not exist at all. See, you have to understand that the hard realities that the African American slaves were facing was not a hard reality for people or the white individual or the white Americans like Huck at all. They were a part of their lives. And even though they were a part of the life of Jim too, Jim wanted to come out of it. Jim wanted to go beyond it. And therefore, the freedom or the sense of freedom that both of these characters have are very much different from each other. Primarily or fundamentally because Huck always has a choice to come back. And Jim will always be a fugitive because he has run away. And maybe this is the reason why a critic like Julius Lester would go on to say that the freedom that this novel promises is false and nothing but a void. Now the novel becomes controversial or problematic because of this very issue, because of the morality that is dealt with in the novel, because of the way this morality is dealt with in the novel. And in an instance, Mark Twain, in his autobiography, would say this a very controversial and problematic statement, as you can see, that Mark Twain would readily opt for what he implies is that maybe his novel around which so many controversies are going on, and so many people are challenging or banning his book, and there are so many cases that are going on against this very same book, which led to Mark Twain starting his own publishing house, that a Bible is perhaps more dangerous than Huckleberry Finn. Now, it is this moral compass, it is this very turbulent moral compass, or moral compass kept on very turbulent waters, that makes this book so controversial. Controversial particularly because it is a character like Huckleberry Finn whose adventures we are reading about, and not any other person. Huckleberry, a 14-year-old boy, a 14-year-old white American boy who is misbehaved, who is foul mouthed, who smokes, who sleeps on, well, door sides or porches of houses when the weather is fine, and in empty cowsheds when it is raining. This kind of a character is exemplified as a morally correct hero. Now, this is the main issue around which the controversies would surround. The problem regarding the morality of the novel and the morality that is being expressed by a character who is like Huckleberry. And Huck clearly deviates from the belief system of the civilization to which he belongs to, or from which he is essentially trying to escape. He does not want to be. He does not want to be. He wants to be civilized per se, or civilized according to the notion of civilization as the people living on the shore are teaching him, are preaching, are propagating, or practicing. His morality or his moral sense is not merely the customary belief of the time. And it is this very essential attitude of Huckleberry, the fact that Huck forms his very own close knit circle of morality, that is very much different, that is very much opposite to the normal or to the normative custom or the normative belief that was prevalent among the white Americans. It is this attitude of Huck that leads Lionel Trilling to say that Huckleberry Finn, or The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, the novel, is a subversive novel. That by way of expressing what was really going down at the time, and by making a character, a protagonist, who being of that time, who being ingrained or being indoctrinated by the customs of the time is habitually or moralistically different. The decisions that he makes are different from the decision that a Tom Sawyer would make, that a Miss Watson would make, that a Judge Thatcher would make, that a Pap would definitely make. And this is what makes the book subversive. And this subversiveness essentially challenges the Kantian ideal of enlightenment, the Kantian ideal of the social contract, a social contract, a society in which its members are related to each other by way of obedience, by way of a universal moral conduct. Morality can never be universal, and this is the very fact that has been exemplified by the novel. And this is also how Huck challenges, as I said, that Huck challenges the common belief or notions of the time. He chooses to help Jim in his journey of escape, in his journey of being together with his own family, with his wife and children. He rejects any idea or any possibility of social peer approval that this action would readily terminate. Nobody would side with him. Even the character of Tom Sawyer, who is a friend to Huck at least, does not approve of it. Huck's behavior challenges the notions of the average man. As very subserviently, the book also has a character called Colonel Sherburne, and he's answered that the average man is a coward, that the average man, or the common man, who abides by all the rules and regulations that are implemented by the invisible hands that govern our society, he accepts and is in approval with it because he is a coward, because he does not have the guts, because he does not have the sense of absolute freedom that Huck would use in order to bring out Jim of an institution that is clearly evil to him, and that is the institution of slavery. And when he sees that this criminal institution of slavery, when he sees that this institution is widely accepted by the very people who try to civilize him, he readily rejects its ideals. He rejects its ideals and forms his own belief system in which he is satisfied with himself, even if he proves to be a criminal to the society. And this is the very society that both of them are trying to escape. He escapes the notions of the average man. He is not a coward. He is not bound by the social contract which pays no attention to the weak, to the poor, to men who are enslaved by fellow men themselves. And this is also the reason why Huck is the most appropriate friend for Jim, most appropriate person whom Jim can have as a friend. Huck, who is uh, free from the embellishments of the shore civilization that refuses to grant him freedom from the restraints or the constraints which it sees as normal. No other character or no other person than Huck could be a friend to Jim. And therefore, both of these people, both of the men, both of the human beings, they carry out their journey together. A journey which does not refine their consciences, but exemplifies the purity of their hearts. It is also, while escaping the hell that enslaved America symbolizes, that America that practiced slavery symbolizes, the hell that it was for the African Americans and also for people like Huck, who refused to be formed into, or to be enmeshed in the normal structure. While they are escaping this hell, they are also escaping their own very private and personalized hell. As we have already discussed in class, there was a remarkable episode in which Huck tries to fool Jim, and at the end of it, he is remorseful and he promises or he vows never to pull a prank on him again anymore. There will also be a passage in the novel where Jim will confess to a cruelty that he would commit on his own daughter. His daughter would go deaf because of his her father slapping her due to disobedience that she would commit. Jim confesses to Huck about this and relieves himself. He mourns and relieves himself by confessing to a friend who is no other than Huck, who is also compassionate, as we have already learned. And therefore, both of these men, both of these people, they form an ethic which we shall call the raft ethic, the ethic that they follow, the ethical sentiments that they develop on the raft while being on the raft, while floating on the great Mississippi, is that on the raft they are for each other, that they are together, they are with each other. Nobody is subservient, nobody is submissive to the other, nobody is dominant over the other. Everybody is satisfied. And therefore, when Huck would sleep, Jim would Jim would take over the watch for him, take care of him, provide food for him, cook for him, teach him whatever he is unknown of, and form this glorious bond of friendship that endures the novel, that has endured centuries and will continue to endure for a few centuries if the COVID-19 does not kill us now. And even though the novel has been discredited by being called racist, it has been alleged that this novel is a racist novel because of the words that it uses, uh, because of various interpretations by variety of critics. Even though the novel has been called racist, Mark Twain believed that after living in a society, or after having given space in this world to a society which saw nothing wrong in strongly establishing an institution of slavery, he took it upon himself, or rather all white Americans or all Americans, that it is up to them now to make amends for what their country or for what their nation has so far practiced. Herman Melville would also go on, would be in agreement, and they would come to this conclusion that the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is actually not racist at all, but an accurate historical documentation of the enslaved America, of the America that still practiced slavery at that point of time. And this is the kind of society that Huck and Jim are essentially trying to escape, in which a nigger, a black American, or a slave is not even considered to be a human, even in death, which is quite opposite to what Christianity preaches. Racial attitudes, even though they have as their background or have as their pillars of religious superiority by race, that is sanctioned by the religion that they practice, the homogeneous God that they look up to, as opposed to the multifarious gods that an African American would have. So, a nigger, an African American, even in death, is not considered to be a human being. Now, this person is a person who is trying to apparently civilize Huck, but in a customary belief like this, which Huck tries to evade. So Huck and Jim escape a society which is represented by people, by good people, apparently good people, like Aunt Sally, in an America inhabited by slave owners, by slave catchers, by liars, by thieves, murderers, burglars, drunkards, violent, unethical human beings, the values of which Huck refuses to conform to. And this is this awful country that Huck tries to escape. He cannot live in a world like this. He cannot live in a world where people claim themselves to be religious, claim themselves to be in the process of praying and carry guns in between their legs. He cannot call himself as one with the people for whom a source of entertainment is lighting fire to a dog's tail if there is nothing else to do. He cannot stand the morality of these people. He cannot accept them to be moralistic. His concept of morality is totally a deviation from what is the shore morality, from the morality of the shore civilization. And this proves that morality as an idea, as a possessing idea, can never be universal. And all of this, Mark Twain or Clemens sets up against a background of humor. The novel has humorous episodes, depictions made humorously, meaning of the novel conveyed to us in a comical, understated fashion. Now, this was important. This is very important. And at this point of time, I would like to digress a bit and tell you about two very key theoretical points that are important in order to analyze this novel, which is also an instance of freedom from colonization, freedom from imposition, from domination. Slavery is a form of colonization. Slavery, if we consider colonization or the British colonization, which it actually is, to be a form of imposition and domination, of constraints and restraints imposed and implemented not for the common good, but for the personal good of the people who considered themselves to be racially superior. There are two key theoretical terms that you need to understand at this juncture. The first of which is a term called carnivalesque. Both of these terms were used used by a critic or a theorist called Mikhail Bakhtin, who was a Russian formalist of the 1920s and the 30s, and he uses this term carnivalesque. From the very term, you can separate an idea that is of the carnival. Now, what happens in a carnival? It's very simple to understand, it's not very difficult if you just think in terms of how you have seen a fair or a carnival happening in front of you. Consider something that happens far away from us in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro. In that particular event of the carnival, people from various strata of the society, from various classes, races, traditional backgrounds, even foreigners who do not belong to that land per se, they come there to celebrate a singular event. They wear masks so nobody can see their faces. They're apparently unrecognizable, and yet they celebrate together. They are happy, they laugh, they dance, they smile, they live during that time without any differences, without any racial superiority, without any racial inferiority. Come back to home. Consider the festival of Holi. Black people, a white person, a rickshawala, a person who lives on the 20th floor of the South City apartments, a dog owner, a cat owner, a woman, a man, belonging to his 70s, a man belonging to his 20s, a girl who does not perhaps go to school or college, and a highly educated woman, a lawyer, a doctor. All of these people, they come on the streets, they smear colors on their faces, and the only thing that is visible are their eyes and their teeth. Now, this is the laughter, which is the most subversive act that a human being can pull amidst a world that is nothing but cruel. So, when you laugh out, Bakhtin says that when you laugh out loud in the face of authority, you are either called a madman or never paid attention to. You are not criminalized for laughing. Reading Huckleberry Finn, which is allegedly a racist novel, hides its racism, again I would say hides its alleged racism under the umbrella or under the spectacle of humor. It was Mark Twain's objective to humorously depict what was seriously going down in the America of the 19th century, of the 18th century. The historical depiction of the development of the institution of slavery, depiction by humor, subverses the very act of slavery itself. So when you are laughing in front of by reading out a monologue of the drunkard father of Huck, who is clearly an absolute racist person, a cruel, violent, abusive man, does not even spare his own son, has no sense of moral compass whatsoever, you will be compelled to laugh only because of the way Mark Twain writes it, or portrays him, or depicts him, paints him. And this laughter is the very way in which acts of authority are transcended, are overcome. Laughter is not, it's not just, laughing out loud without any reason. It is grotesque, it is wild, it is vulgar, it is dirty, it is unacceptable, and therefore subversive. And the fact it does not challenge directly by saying out loud or by advocating seriously the ills of a society that proclaims slavery to be a natural institution, by laughing at it, you clearly diminish it in its value, in its superiority. It is grotesque in its very act. And this is how Mark Twain, or this, even if Twain did not have the notion of a carnivalesque when he was writing, the fact that he chose the way of humor in order to draw a historical portrait of the American institutionalized slavery proves the text to be a subservient one. The next term, the theoretical term we need to understand, I will be explaining in a few more minutes. And this laughter is often therapeutic. Regards this particular novel, this laughter is therapeutic in the sense that it allows you to see the institution of slavery for the futility that it entailed, for the illogical, unethical, and inexplicable rules that it carried on for generations after generations. It interrogates and it questions the authenticity of this institution by laughing at it, by sideswiping it to ignorance, something that is to be laughed at, by diminishing its quality that has been put on the pedestal for so many years, for so many decades, and therefore humor. But however, we must not forget that the issue that Mark Twain deals with in his novel is much more serious and much more severe, precisely because of the fact He did not belong to that race that was objectified, that was perpetually otherized, that was pervasively dominated, humiliated, shamed, tortured, killed, sold, bought, raped, and all the other atrocities that you can ever imagine, or you can never even imagine in your dreams, that a human being can inflict upon another human being. And the fact that he uses the word nigger so many times, that puts the novel in the controversial phase primarily, is truly controversial in its true sense. Because this word, even if it is a word, even if it is just a word for Mark Twain or Clemens, or a word that he is frequently listening to or coming across during his days, or the word which was in frequent use up to the abolition, or up to its banning, up to the banning of its usage as a criminal offense, the fact that he uses this word so callously leads leads many critics to say that Twain did not empathize with the blacks. And how could he, a privileged male white American that he was? How could he put himself in the shoes of a slave who is cleaning your shit, who is cleaning your house, who is cleaning your clothes, you, your children, managing your life, your family, your society, your agricultural fields, and himself or herself dying of cold, heat, hunger, beatings, infections, and whatnot? How could he empathize with this race of people who always stand opposite to him, who are always inferior to him? And therefore, so many allegations. And therefore, people will be saying that the fact that Mark Twain uses this word for so many times without paying any attention to the sentiment, to the emotional attachment that this word entails, makes him racist, makes him unempathetic, makes him cruel, and makes his work justified in its banishment, in its banning, in the banning of it. The word nigger entailed with it connoted the history of humiliations that the African Americans were following, were part of, the tradition of humiliation that they were a part of, the constant using of them, utilization of them for the good of the white superior race, buying and selling of themselves, being separated from their families. This word entails all of this. And the fact that it must not be used so callously can never be refuted. And the controversy over race, fact that it was banned from so many schools and still is in quite a number of them, is not altogether unjustified. Because we do have to look at all the perspectives that are entailed in any kind of justification, in any kind of decisive process. And both of these interpretations are not false. And we must also not forget that the connotations of this word, if it is at all indiscernible to us, that why on earth is this word so offensive, we must not forget that this sentiment the blacks share with no other racial group. That this word, every time this word is uttered, it is the history of shame, humiliation, fear that is brought back again and again into their minds. And since their race, the race of the African Americans, cannot share this sentiment with any other racial group in this world, and when this word is used so frequently, so callously, does not put Mark Twain or does not put the novel in a very bright light altogether. And we must also remember that Huck helping Jim, um, as he um, does not really expand his liberalistic views beyond the person of Jim himself. What I mean by that is that if in a different scenario, Huck was asked to free or help in freeing other slaves or other blacks, other quote unquote niggers, perhaps he would not. This is the system of slavery or the institution of slavery. Huck singularly rejects but does not consider to be wrong. As we had already discussed in class, the early passages of the book, Huck repeatedly says that I will go to hell. Let me go to hell. I will not go to hell for this. This proves, this intricately implies that he believes in the rightfulness of this institution to exist. He does not consider its existence to be wrong, but singularly chooses to disregard it. Nonetheless, he chooses to disregard it nonetheless. And if it were a different scenario, and in another case, if he would have been asked to free slaves, as he had done with Jim, perhaps he would have not opted for it. It is his deeply developing or heartfelt love for Jim as a person that he chooses to help in his emancipation, that he chooses to accompany him in their mutual escape from the civilization, from the shore civilization. There is also another point, there is also another very, very important aspect of this novel in Twain's depiction of Jim, the slave, uh, that pushes this novel into this further into the controversy. The depiction of Jim as a clownish, funny speaking, always following or submitting to his white master, white friend or owner. His depiction of Jim in that manner, it essentially or duly kind of pays respect to or follows a tradition that was already in its well-rooted place from the early 19th century, from the 1820s, 30s, before Huckleberry Finn was written, and therefore we have all the right to assume that Mark Twain was well aware of this tradition, and everybody was because it was very popular. Now, what was this tradition? This tradition was of the minstrel show, of the black face. Now, what is this black face? I will try to show you some pictures. Let's see if I can. No, I gloriously failed to do that. Nonetheless, I will be attaching the pictures at the end of this tutorial. However, just a verbal definition of what the minstrel show meant. The minstrel show was, as I said, a predominant culture. It was a theatrical show. It was, as I am saying, that it was a show. That means that it was a performance that was carried out by people in front of an audience, a theatrical performance of the black face. And what was this black face? Why black face? Because this black is not actually an African American that is being put on the stage. He is a slave. He has no right to be on upon a stage, upon a theater, in a theater. And therefore it is a white male who paints his face black, reddens his lips, and flouts himself on the stage as a rakish, roguish character. It was an insult, obviously, to the social forces that were developing or that were turning up in huge tides during that period. It was an insult to the subversive forces that the African Americans were proposing or were putting forward in front of the superior American white race. And many critics will go on to say aptly that Mark Twain's portrayal of Jim was nothing less or nothing short of a following of this tradition, and in that he never deviates. And when you will see the picture, it will be clearer, I hope. There are various other interpretations. Another one, which is very, very important, is the language, is the conversations that take place between the two men. Before coming to this, which is a very important aspect of the novel, I would also like to mention another interpretation that behind an interpretation that defends Mark Twain's stance in the novel, Clemens's stance in the novel. And this interpretation would go like this, that Mark Twain chooses this exact backdrop of Jim as caricatured like a black slave, like a black face, and in the following the tradition of that minstrel show, it was important because no amount of preaching by the shore civilization could have changed Huck, because Tom Sawyer, who is a contemporary of Huck, who is the protagonist of another of Twain's very popular novel, is not changed by the preachings or the teachings of the civilization which he accepts and which he chooses to be the correct one, which he does not disregard, unlike Huck. But for Huck, this setting is important because it is through this particular kind of depiction that we find a development in Huck. It is Jim's personality, it is Jim's own character, and not his descriptions, or not the descriptions that have been imposed by him upon him by the society, that reveal themselves slowly to Huck, and Huck grows fonder and fonder of Jim until they have forged a strong friendship, a very, very strong friendship and relationship of mutual trust, which does not break till the very end. Now, continuing on with the other interpretation, as the other version, another version, that is the language or the particular conversations that take place between Huck and Jim, and why are they so important? Now, this minstrel show, pictures of which I will be attaching at the end of this tutorial. This minstrel show, which was on one level very pejorative, insulting, and humiliating towards the entire African American race, on the other side, it was also a way in which the novel was once again subversive. The first theoretical term, or the first subversive element that I pointed out, or that we saw uh, previously, was the carnivalesqueness of the novel. Now, this, which again I'm going to write it on the video as you can see, is also propounded by the same person, Mikhail Bakhtin, and he calls it heteroglossia. Now, what is this heteroglossia? Keeping in mind the fact that Bakhtin was essentially analyzing the genre of, particularly the genre of novels, in his book, or while he was expounding on his theoretical base, what he meant. First, I would like to just explain what Bakhtin meant while he was writing about heteroglossia in his book. Uh, from that perspective, when we are studying a novel, we will find that there are multiple references to other works as well. Those other works need not be limited to the similar temporal period during which that particular novel was written or composed. It may as well take the readers back 100 years, or may as well will foreshadow a futuristic outcome. It brings with it, or carries with it, allusions. It carries with it symbols which belong to other religions, which belong to other communal groups, which belong to other racial sentiments. And all of these things, they are brought together in one particular generic platform, and that is the novel. And the fact that the novel can do this, that it can refer back to multiple texts that do not essentially belong to its own genre, or do not even belong to that temporal duration, or even to that geographical or spatial, uh, the space that in which the novel takes place. The fact that it can do this, the term that he uses for this act is intertextuality, and the fact that a novel can carry with it successfully this aspect of intertextuality leads to this heteroglossia. Heteroglossia, deriving from the word heterogeneous, means that this very aspect of intertextuality within a particular or within a singular text, or that is any novel that is under study, whenever we are including this separate texts or texts that are not this particular novel under the study, we are including a variety of other perspectives. They are heterogeneous. They refuse to be homogenized. They refuse to be singularized under a similar umbrella. They refuse to be defined with a single term. And the fact that that a novel can carry with it perfectly all of these perceptions, all of these perspectives, dialects, various languages, people from various traditional, historical, geographical backgrounds, racial backgrounds, and the fact that a novel can do this, this aspect of the novel is essentially known as heteroglossia. Now, where do we find this heteroglossia in Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn? Very particularly, if we want to just provide one example, the perfect example would be the French question, in which Huck and Jim have a conversation about the French being a different language. Huck converses with Jim with his own logic, and Jim converses or answers or replies back to Huck with his own logic. Both of them are justified in their own case. The fact that Jim can say that a human being is a human being no matter where he is born, so the language that a human being speaks must be understood by another human being. This fact in itself is not entirely untrue. This fact in itself is not entirely a lie. But it is also true that what Huck says is that French is a different language. His logic lies or relies on the fact that animals also have a language of their own, but we cannot understand their language because ours is different. And Jim justifies himself by saying, are the French animals? Then, if they are not, then their language must be understood by us. The fact, and this fundamental fact, that one particular singular passage carries the logical arguments through conversation of these two men, of a boy and a man belonging to completely different racial backgrounds, that entailing its own cultural and traditional history of abusee and the abuser. The fact that a single passage does not undermine or does not over determine any particular logic, the fact that the author does not take the side of any one singular stance, is heteroglossic in nature. And this is how the adventures of Huckleberry Finn is again subversive. That, in a way, to the white American boy, Huck, who comes to the conclusion that you can never actually argue with a nigger, and then on the other side being an educated reader, when you understand that the simple or primitive logic that Jim provides is not entirely true, and this fundamental fact that you can keep these two arguments on a similar platform while you flip through the pages of a single book written by a single author, this is heteroglossic in nature, and this is the subversiveness. This is how Mark Twain challenges the beliefs and the customs and the cultural aspect, which Huck obviously tries to evade, but has been a part of nonetheless. And the fact that Mark Twain shows this logic and then brings in a slave man who brings his own logic into the scene, into the argument, and substantiates both of them with equal measure, never understating one, never overstating the other. This is how the adventures of Huckleberry Finn is subversive in another way. And the minstrel show, or the depiction of Jim as a Jim Crow, as a minstrel, as a black face, a blackie, a darkie. These were the terms that were used during the time, along with the term nigger. And he uses this depiction as a platform of subverting the customs, of subverting the normative beliefs. Again, justifies the popularity and the endurance, or the enduring capacity of the novel. And therefore, when previously, as I wrote, and therefore, when Malou calls the novel an ideological drama, it is this very fact that he tries to emphasize. It is that the novel carries within it the necessity points of recognition of a false argument, that you get a chance, without that you get a chance or an option or a choice of looking through or looking at the argument of Jim without any prejudice. And this choice makes the novel subversive. This option, the fact that the reader has a choice, the fact that Huck has a choice of accepting or rejecting the argument provided by Jim, by a slave, the fact that the author provides the protagonist with a choice, with a will, with an act, with the will to act, and the readers as well. This again makes the novel subversive in its very nature. And we must also not forget the fact that Mark Twain himself confessed that he paid a lot of attention, or a lot of detailed attention, to the dialects that he was using in the novel, the vernacular which he was using in his novel, because it is by the use of this very vernacular, which was considered to be barbarous, or the language of the savages by the so-called superior white race. This very language is the language he uses when he overpowers Huck's argument, and that you as a reader get to see or read the language that is of color, that is the vernacular of Jim, and also the language of the superior race of Huck, and the fact that they counter each other and one subverts the other, and it is Jim's argument that subverts the superior argument of the argument of Huck, who belongs to the superior dominating class or race, again brings, or again highlights, the enduring power of this novel. And from this point onwards, we see that there is the bond between Huck and Jim essentially blooms, and it grows, and it strengthens itself. And in the welcome absence of Pat, uh, the father, the drunkard, abusive father of Huck, Jim is accepted by Huck, admired, and loved for the person that he really is. And their relationship grows, and their bond becomes ever more stronger. And while there are still those critics who will be uh, taking up the issue of the ending of the novel, and then talking about why the ending upsets the readers, but why the ending particularly upset the readers, because it takes away all the development, that the apparent development that we see through the that we see within occurring within Huckleberry Finn, the protagonist, within the relationship of Huck and Jim within the novel itself. And that in the ending, when Jim has to submit to the pranks pulled by a 14-year-old, by an adolescent white boy, does lead critics and scholars to say that Mark Twain is a racist, or this novel is essentially a racist novel, that because at the end of the journey, at the end of the entire book, which is obviously a journey on the Mississippi River, the ending cancels out or snuffs out the candle of friendship that grows between a white boy and a black man. The flicker of possibility that this friendship may actually exist is taken out by the fact, by the ending, when Jim is again sent back to his to his occupying place. And however, however, there will be other critics. There will be opposing views, as we have seen that there are opposing views regarding the entirety of the novel. Another writer, another critic will say that the ending particularly brings out the essential intent or the essential point of the novel. Mark Twain, while he was creating Huck with his own moral qualities, with his own moral compass, own and personal and private moral compass, that is, that deviates from the customary beliefs of the society, he was not Twain was not writing about or trying to compose a conscience that was particular or peculiar or typical only to the South. He did not make or depict Huck as a person or as a character who rejects the Southern conscience. Huck, as a character, or the character of Huck, rejects all kinds of conscience. He rejects the concept of conscience altogether. And the fact that Jim again goes back to slavery at the end of the novel, or the fact that it is blurry, that we do not know actually what happens. Does he really go back to slavery again, or is or is he emancipated? We do not know that. And this very dilemmatic point, this very point of predicament, pushes us to believe that, or leads us to believe, accurately leads us to believe that this is what Twain might have intended to do, because true freedom is never really possible. Does not matter if you are black, it does not matter if you are white. Even if you are rich and privileged, belonging to the first world order, a man, in the patriarchal society, and rich in a world where most of it is poor, so you're privileged in so many senses. Even then, you are not really free. You are not really free from the society which you inhabit, from the law of the land where you live. Even if you are deviating from that particular law, you are running away from it. And the fact that you have to hide obviously shows that you are not free. And even if you are abiding by the law restricts you. It restricts your desire. And Huck, as a protagonist, is one character who always follows his desire, his pleasure principle. He does not want to get civilized. A logic of an educated, civilized person will never understand that why is this boy whose father is a drunkard, who runs around in ragged shoes and pants, naked up top, smokes pipe, gives racial slurs, speaks in a somewhat kind of a vernacularish form of a language, a vagabond, somebody who roams around, is shiftless, has no ambition, wants to spend his day and night floating on the Mississippi as if he has no responsibility whatsoever. There is no as if here. He does not want to assume any responsibility. He wants to do what his heart wants. He wants to lie on his back and stare at the stars. He wants to float endlessly on the Mississippi and feel one with the freedom that the river symbolizes. The swiftness, the the path without any hindrances that the Mississippi symbolizes, the raft symbolizes, that Huck wants to embody, that Huck wants to symbolize from within himself as well. And this is what the ending also symbolizes, that in a world where we live, which does not give us complete freedom ever, is also a world which Jim inhabits, is also a world which Huck inhabits. And therefore, Huck has to be this kind of a boy in order to adhere to his previous roles, to the way that he has been throughout his novel, as one who listens to nothing else than his own desire, his own heart's wish. And that will be it for this particular recording, this particular video. There will be more following in it. I will be talking a little bit more about the racial issues, and then about the ending, which I spoke about only a little bit right now. The ending requires a lot more attention, and another recording, 3 to 4, I think, or at the most 3, and I think that will be enough. I will be sharing some materials with you in the group, and please look at the pictures that will follow this video and try to understand what I was trying to say. And I realize that it must be difficult, uh, and would have been easier if I did show the pictures right then, but I could not do it, and please excuse me for that. But do try to come to a common understanding, and if you have any queries or question, feel free to ask. Thank you very much.